Just as Europe frets over fresh Trump tariffs, a U.S. troop drawdown announced for Germany, and the message it sends to a hostile Russia, well, how about not one, but two summits in former Soviet state Armenia. Before a first ever gathering of EU leaders in Yerevan on Tuesday, the European political community, that's a talk shop with regional players that also includes Ukraine and many NATO heavyweights like the UK, Norway, and an outside guest who shares superpower proximity problems. We'll revisit Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's clarion call for so-called middle powers that share common interests and values to band together. So this summit, a show of strength or a provocation, sure to rile both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. 1 month before Armenia's incumbent Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan goes before voters to sell his U.S.-brokered peace deal with neighbouring Azerbaijan. This in a general election. More broadly, do wars in Iran and Ukraine make Western-style liberal democracy an easier or a harder sell? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Armenia's European summits, plural. With us from Yerevan, Richard Garagosian, Director of the Regional Studies Center think tank. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
We have a Richard and we have a Richard Verly, correspondent for Swiss daily Blick. You're the author in French of This America That Hates Us, your road trip across the United States that you wrote about recently. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Francois.
Georgia's former European Affairs Minister Thornike Gordadze is fellow at the Jacques Delors Institute think tank. Welcome back to the show. And welcome as well to Marie Capata, who is a research fellow at the Study Committee on Franco-German Relations at the French Political Science think tank IFRI. How are you?
Thank you. Very well.
You can, by the way, always listen. That's right, listen to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, can the usual workshops and polite speeches on trade and partnerships at a summit work when the optics look really like a NATO summit without the United States? This in a nation that's home to a Russian military base. Delano de Souza explains.
As heads of state gather for the 8th meeting of the European political community, an unpredictable United States under Donald Trump looms in the background. The biannual forum aims to boost democratic resilience as well as economic and energy security. The French president, who was the driving force behind the initiative following the war in Ukraine, says given the current political climate, the body is proof Europe is stepping up.
We Europeans are building our own security solutions. This isn't a reaction to anyone. Europeans are taking their destiny in their own hands, increasing defense spending and building their own solutions.
Monday's gathering comes days after Washington announced it would be pulling 5,000 troops from Germany in response to criticisms from the country's chancellor over the lack of U.S. strategy in Iran. The NATO chief, who's known for cozying up to Donald Trump, justified the move.
We have seen some disappointment on the US side with the reaction of Europeans to what is happening in Iran and the US trying to make sure the world is safer. I would say the Europeans have heard the message.
While Mark Rutte remains eager to stay in Trump's good graces, EU officials say the US announcement caught them off guard.
The timing of this announcement comes as a surprise. I think it shows that we have to really strengthen the European pillar in NATO.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has become the first non-European leader to attend the summit as Ottawa seeks closer ties with Europe amid strained relations with Washington.
It's an important time in the world that like-minded countries come together with a positive attitude, look to solve some of the many challenges our citizens are facing.
Armenia has become the first country in the Caucasus to host a European political community meeting. The gathering comes ahead of parliamentary elections in June as the country seeks to forge closer ties with Europe in a diversification strategy, a move Moscow warns will have economic costs for Yerevan.
And you saw in those images there at the end, Thornike Gordadze, the kiss on the cheeks of Emmanuel Macron to the Italian Prime Minister, something you didn't see a while back. Relations had been frosty.
Yeah, but I mean, this platform was pretty much if not invented, but pushed by Emmanuel Macron, and he feels a little bit like a co-organizer of this meeting in Yerevan, knowing also the particular relations France has with Armenia. So he was not officially a co-host, but he was a little bit considered by others also as a co-organizer kind of this meeting. So he was very much at ease, and he already met the Armenian Prime Minister. They went for a walk in the streets of Yerevan. Part of the official visit is it's a planned visit also in the second biggest city of Armenia, Gyumri, where the Russian military base is situated, by the way. So yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's you have among the countries that are present all the European countries plus Canada minus Russia and Belarus. So most of the countries agree on most of the things. And it's a powerful message of support for Armenia and Armenia's European future.
Okay, so Richard Garagosian, when you're in Yerevan this Monday, what's higher on people's minds? Because again, you heard there Thornike talk about the big superpowers that are not present at this. Are people thinking more about Russia or the United States?
Well, actually, what we see is people thinking more about the European Union and the European political community's engagement. For example, even the Azerbaijani president phoned in his message, participating remotely. The Turkish vice president is here as well. This is much more a reflection of Armenia's strategic significance, but it's really about reasserting Armenian independence. But Armenia, in terms of poking the bear, is also not alone. This European engagement is also about poking the bear. And this is not because of the Trump administration, but despite the Trump administration.
And you mentioned the geography, which matters. Turkey on one side, Azerbaijan on the other. To the south, there's Iran. The strategic significance of Armenia couldn't be greater on a day when it's flaring up again in the Strait of Hormuz. Is Armenia's position set to grow further as a result of what's happening?
Yes, but in an unexpected direction. For example, Armenia has opened an Armenian embassy in Oman within the past 2 weeks. There's much more of a recognition of the importance of engaging the GCC, the Gulf states, and actually moving away from Iran in terms of trying to mitigate the instability that is now expected. But we do see in Armenia on the ground, we are the most stable regional border state for Iran. And I would say, expectation was surprising that the result from Iran's war was much less than expected. We did not have a mass exodus of Iranians, nor were we targeted. In fact, we were the only neighbor of Iran that was not struck in retaliation.
Marit Kupata, again, this geostrategic positioning. Your thoughts on the fact that, well, this is Armenia now with all this attention. Is that good or bad in the long run for this country? And again, 1 month out from those elections.
Yeah, I think it's a balancing act between Russia and Europe. And last year there was also the declaration, the announcement that Armenia would want to perhaps join the European Union. And there is a comprehensive partnership since 2017 between the European Union and Armenia. There is also, of course, a dependence in terms of energy and transportation from Russia. So it's also a way for Armenia to diversify away, to try to decouple to some extent, perhaps from Russia as well. And for the European political community, the idea is really to have closer ties with countries in the neighborhood of the European Union. So there's this famous neighborhood policy of the European Union. So it's really getting closer ties, work on cooperation in terms of energy, transportation, work also on fighting disinformation and also fight against interference from foreign powers, including Russia, in these elections you were mentioning on 10th of June. So a European Union mission is going to be launched on precisely these topics against disinformation, just as was the case in Moldova ahead of the Moldovan elections in 2025, where a similar mission was launched.
I want to revisit that point first, though, of two minds when it comes to taking on Vladimir Putin. The leader of one EU state that was present, Russian and oil and gas dependent Slovakia. Richard, you ready? It's time to play Read the Body Languages. Robert Fico there sits down with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky on the sidelines of the summit. A little awkward there? What do you think?
Well, I don't think it's awkward. I think Fico is now isolated after the defeat of Viktor Orban in Hungary. He used to be the buddy of Viktor Orban, and they were both fighting against Brussels, asking for more oil and gas from Russia. And sometimes they had the support of the Czech Prime Minister. Right now, he is isolated. Fico, he realized it. Russia is not in a very good moment as far as the Ukraine war is concerned. It's better on the oil front because Russia is selling a lot of oil. So Fico is a pragmatist, or you may say an opportunist. So I don't think he will continue putting the fight against Ukraine. Now what we have to look for is a new country, Bulgaria, not a new country, not a new member country, but the fact is a new government is now in power in Bulgaria with the former president. He has been elected. He is not very much pro-Putin, but he wants an appeasement policy. So let's see if those countries, Slovakia, Czech Republic eventually, and Bulgaria team up together. Just to keep in mind, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Slovakia are not part of the 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine.
And we just heard today the UK was ready to perhaps join that loan as well, confirmed by the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, present at that summit. Tornike Gordadze, you heard Richard in Yerevan saying how Armenia has this sort of strategic importance in terms of geography. In the South Caucasus, that was Georgia's role, right? Georgia was the strategic go-to place you could go to where...
Yeah, you're asking me a very sensitive question for me, because I used to be Georgia's European integration minister.
Is Armenia stealing Georgia's thunder in that regard?
No, now the situation is completely... there are lots of similarities of Georgia 2012 and Armenia today. In 2012, a Georgian-Russian oligarch won elections in Georgia, and slowly the European path was reversed. In Armenia, we have a pro-European prime minister who saw some attempts of Russia to destabilize Armenia before elections, and he put some measures that are not welcomed by everyone, but at least he understood the lesson that was the Georgian lesson. I just want to come back to the few remarks that were raised here. First, poking the bear. Very quickly, we shouldn't forget that this bear is fighting a war against Europe. I mean, it's not just poking out of the blue a country that is following,
but it's not fighting the war against Armenia.
But Russia-Armenia's relations since the 1990s were extremely asymmetric and coercive coming from Russia. Armenia had no geopolitical choice from the beginning of the 90s, because Armenia had a war with Azerbaijan, had not an open war, but quite strained relations with Turkey. The border was closed. There was a blockade. So Armenia had no other geopolitical option than to ally itself with Russia, and Russia was using this dependency in reducing the sovereignty of Armenia that became at the end really limited. So now we see recovering slowly Armenia's sovereignty, and it happens vis-a-vis Russia.
So losing the war against in Nagorno-Karabakh, in a way, gives a freer hand to Armenia, is what you're suggesting?
This and the other factor is that Russia is pretty much busy in Ukraine, and security-wise, Russia cannot act as strongly as before in Armenia. So Russia is now trying to use economic weapon, which is also quite powerful, more coercively. We saw this bilateral meeting of Pashinyan with Putin the 1st of April, and the second day, the long interview of the Russian vice prime minister, who enumerated all the cards that economic cards that Russia had against Armenia, starting with the energy blackmail, transports, Armenian diaspora living in Russia, etc., etc. But again, Armenia's position now is much stronger than in 2013, when Armenia was obliged to renounce to sign the association agreement that Armenia negotiated under Russian pressure. And Armenia is stronger than in 2021, before the previous elections, after the defeat against Azerbaijan, where the current government was extremely weakened, but they managed to win this election. So now Russia has lots of possibilities of pressure on Armenia, but the Armenian current leadership feels much more confident, and this is the result we see now. The Europeans their presence in Yerevan, and the summit that will take place also tomorrow, EU-Armenia summit, is a clear support from the European side to this Armenia's slow but determined emancipation vis-à-vis Russia.
All right, Richard Garagosian, I want to ask you first off about something Thornike just said. They lose one war, the Armenians, against against Azerbaijan. Nikol Pashinyan nonetheless gets reelected. Now they've lost a second one, where this time they've lost all of Nagorno-Karabakh. There's since been that U.S. brokered peace treaty. Is losing wars the path to reelection?
Well, what we see in the Armenian context is a difficult, painful adjustment to a post-war reality, where the Armenian government is cutting its losses and trying its best to encourage a diplomatic solution rather than force of arms. What we also see, however, is several issues that remain lingering in terms of albatross, and specifically Armenian prisoners that continue to be held by Azerbaijan in Azerbaijani prisons. This is a lingering issue that the Armenian government prefers not to address, but something that still resonates in Armenian society. But I do think the government deserves credit for a rare commodity of legitimacy and an impressive degree of stability. June 7th, Armenians go to the polls, and we do expect a third back-to-back genuinely free and fair election. The government likely to be reelected, but largely driven by the absence of any viable, credible alternative. There is no opposition possibility here.
And then there's that question of the proximity with Russia. They don't share a border, but we saw ahead of the summit, for instance, Polish broadcaster TVP went to Armenia, home to the 3,000 Russian soldiers stationed in, you were mentioning it, Richard, Gyumri, at Russia's 102nd military base, steering well clear of there the many Russian army deserters in Armenia who have fled the Ukrainian front.
We believed there was a Russian people, a Ukrainian people, and there was a group of rabid Nazis or Banderites, as we were told, who had seized power in Kyiv as a result of an illegal coup.
Most of those who flee come from central Russia and the south of Russia. First, you need to get there. The easiest way is through injury, by ending up in a medical facility. For example, you can arrange things with a doctor in a hospital, and then say you're going out for cigarettes and escape.
Richard Garagosian, the Russians that you see in Yerevan, tell us about them and what their attitudes are.
Well, I do think the clip that was just played is a bit misleading, because the overwhelming number of Russians now in Armenia are those that fled the war initially, not fled the draft per se, but largely, the difference here is we have Russian young families with strollers, largely in the IT sector, looking to weather the storm of Putin's Russia. That's injected a degree of stability. It's also added a welcome degree of diversity in a country like Armenia. But this is less of a contentious issue with Putin. We have, as identified, economic and trade vulnerability, and specifically Armenia's membership in Putin's prison, the Eurasian Economic Union. That is the essential contradiction or stumbling block preventing any idea of joining the EU.
Are you disappointed that Kazakhstan was not present at this forum today?
Not necessarily, because behind the scenes, Central Asia is playing a much more active role, looking at Armenia and Azerbaijan as well as an emerging gateway to Central Asia. For example, Armenia is now negotiating for gas imports from Turkmenistan through Azerbaijan. Armenia is importing grain from Kazakhstan, ironically again through Azerbaijan. So the only disappointment here was that this cannot be held every week. As a small country like Armenia, the existential threat is insignificance and isolation. So we need to sustain the momentum of Armenia's strategic significance.
And it's not every week, but at least you get two summits for the price of one. The one on Tuesday is with the European Union, and it will include something that Marie alluded to, the announcement of help from Brussels ahead of those June 7th elections. The EU setting up a team of 20 to 30 civilian experts for a 2-year mission. Now, this will be after the elections in Armenia, but it'll be aimed at improving the response to cyber attacks, information manipulation and interference, as well as countering illicit financial flows. Separately, the EU's Foreign Service has announced a hybrid rapid response team with the short-term goal of battling foreign interference before those elections, which are seen as pivotal in determining whether Armenia stays on a broadly pro-Western path. Mary Kopata, that's poking the bear, but not Armenia, the European Union, right? I mean, this is what they did in Moldova as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we have to understand that for the European Union as well, we are facing a situation where its sovereignty is at play as well. So this is also all happening against the backdrop of worsening transatlantic relations. And as you mentioned also before, Mark Carney is present at the EPC meeting. So the idea is also to, have closer ties with other middle powers as a European Union, so to actually reposition the European strategy. And as was mentioned before as well, Friedrich Merz is currently in a very complicated situation against the backdrop of the announcements of Donald Trump.
Yeah, he played it off like it was okay. This was just something that happens regularly, like a rotation of troops almost.
Sure, and indeed, it's not surprising that Donald Trump announces the withdrawal of troops. That was already the case during his first term. And if you read the national security strategy and the US national defense strategy, you can see that Europe needs to take more responsibility for its own defense. And already Obama said that the US...
But it's clearly a signal. You didn't help me with Iran, or you told us that we were erratic.
Sure.
This is the price.
Of course. So within 1 year now, these troops should leave the country. Plus also, cruise missiles, Tomahawks that should have been placed in Germany will not be delivered. So there are actually capacity gaps that will not be able to be filled by European weapons that easily because of this withdrawal.
Germany, which has the most U.S. troops in Europe by far. There's also the UK, and third is Italy. Italy's Prime Minister was much more blunt than the German Chancellor when she spoke on the sidelines of that summit in Yerevan.
We know that for some time now, the United States has, shall we say, been discussing a withdrawal from Europe, which is why I believe we must strengthen our security and, let's say, develop our capacity to respond in this regard. That said, it is clearly a decision that does not depend on me, and one that I personally would not support.
Why can't the German Chancellor say that, Richard Verly?
German Chancellor, I believe, is quite under shock and pressure after what he said. You remember several days ago he said that Donald Trump and the US are being humiliated by Iran, and clearly the White House did not like that language. And it's a very new language for Germany. Never before Germany has been so critical about the United States. So give him a chance. Friedrich Merz, he has gone quite far at the moment, so I think he needs some respite. No, what I wanted to add is what we are witnessing in Armenia today with the summit, with the second summit, with the response force, is EU soft and hard power. It's this capacity of projecting an hybrid power. It is a soft power in the sense that these EU experts will be there to kind of foster the pro-EU sentiment, but in the meantime, to respond, for example, to cyber attacks or tentative of influencing the future election. So I think it's a good example. We have not many reasons to be optimistic about Europe, but what we are witnessing in Armenia at the moment give us a feel of hope.
All right, a feel of hope. I'm going to try to just dash this for you for a second here, or play devil's advocate, if you will. You have the drawdown of troops that we talked about, and also Donald Trump, this is not to be understated, last Friday also threatened 25% tariffs on EU cars and trucks because of the bloc's reluctance to ratify, remember this? This was last summer.
Turnberry.
And Turnberry in Scotland, that deal that was bemoaned by many in Brussels. Between Donald Trump and the European Commission president. This was at one of his golf courses. And while countries like France want more guardrails against the agreement, Germany, whose automakers are struggling, among the nations pressing the European Parliament to settle. All right, we'll play that clip of Friedrich Merz perhaps later on.
Well, what I wanted to say is, and so what? It's very clear, as you said. I've written a book whose title is "Cette Amérique qui nous déteste," this America that hates us. No mercy policy from the US. I mean, there is nothing to accept from the US and from this administration in terms of gift to the EU, gift to the European
So is that
integration.
is that the wrong attitude by the German Chancellor?
No.
To be saying, look, you should sign this deal with the Americans.
No, I believe that the difficulty for Germany, and it has to reinvent itself in its attitude toward the United States. We're talking about 50 years, 60 years, 70 years of being under the US umbrella, economically speaking, but also militarily speaking. So give Germany a chance, I may say. It takes time, it's difficult. The road may be bumpy, but at least what we are seeing in Berlin is a kind of trying to get more autonomy from the US.
Again, Friedrich Merz last week says to students in his home region that the United States was being humiliated by Iran, Thornike Gordadze.
They had no plan,
And they have no plan.
When it comes to...
And now he's since said, it's not that big a deal, the drawdown, and please ratify that trade deal with the United States. Is this 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, or 1 step forward, 2 steps backwards?
I think we'll see it later if whether it was a right strategy or not. But whatever is your strategy when you're dealing with Donald Trump, at the end, you never know what will be the outcome. This unpredictability is the biggest problem. Not because every calculus, every strategy you have may just blow up with Donald Trump's decisions. And this is the only lesson that the Europeans can learn from this, is that he's treating his allies, like even the most trustful allies among the allies, like Germany and Italy, even worse than some of others. And one of the results of this is also that the Germans and most of Europeans now understand that security-wise, supporting Ukraine is even more urgent. And Ukraine playing, I'm not saying that Ukraine can replace the US one day, it's not the same capacity, etc., but they had the same time, Ukraine is really the only European country that showed its capacity to fight, to innovate, and to resist. And for the future, having Ukraine on board with Europe or in NATO or something that will, the future shape that NATO will take is extremely important. And then with the US attitude, the Europeans understand it even more. That's having Ukraine is one of the consequences of that. And this is the reason why also Zelensky is one of the stars of this meeting. And there was a meeting specifically on Ukraine that everyone is meeting Zelensky, including Fico. And I'm sure that even with this new Bulgarian government, no one can replace Viktor Orban. No one can really play the role he was playing before. Bulgaria is much more vulnerable. It depends pretty much on European subsidies, even more than Hungary. And especially the Europeans understood how to behave also with these kinds of countries that are undermining. Yeah, so they will not repeat the same mistakes they did with Hungary.
Okay, but Mary Kopata, as we're hearing from the whole panel here, if you're the European Union, you've got your calculus vis-a-vis Russia and your calculus vis-a-vis the United States. These days, they kind of have to both kind of go together, right? So is the German chancellors, you heard Richard Verly stating that you should give Friedrich Merz a long leash on his messaging. Do you give him a long leash?
It's a very complicated question, actually, but
it's a yes or no question.
No, but the thing is, Boris Pistorius, for instance, the defense minister in Germany, said so that the NATO can stay transatlantic, it needs to become more European. So we need to work on the European pillar of NATO. We need to work more on our own capabilities.
Yeah, but
our
we
own
talk
capacities.
about this so often. This is the moment is now, though. You see, with the troop drawdown, with the tariffs, and with Russia.
Of course, it is now. We need to act now, and so the criticism against Friedrich Merz that he's not hawkish enough is there. And we've been talking about the anti-coercion instrument, for instance, when it comes to tariffs, to defend ourselves. But we actually have never used this atomic bomb of trade mechanisms we have and trade tools we have. So indeed, we have a toolbox, but we also have very different situations within the European Union. The Germans are very exposed trade-wise when it comes to the United States, and much more than France is and than other countries is. And if Germany is hurt, we will all be hurt because there are many ties and our economies are very much intertwined.
So at the end of the day, does the European Union bend the knee and ratify that trade deal signed at a Trump golf course in Scotland?
Well, I think it's in the benefit of the European Union to ratify the trade deal. The European Union, especially in this time of intense difficulty on the energy front, you cannot have a trade war with the US. And I think everybody believes that. So let's see, first of all, if Trump continues to be so aggressive with his 25% against Germany, he may change down. Trump sometimes changes his mind, and it's in the benefit of the EU at the moment to have calm water on the Atlantic when it comes to trade. We do not have energy, so at least we need to keep our markets to export what we have to sell.
One of those countries that does have energy is Azerbaijan. We mentioned them earlier in the conversation. Not present in Yerevan, but present instead by video link. Its leader, Ilham Aliyev, the big winner of that war that chased ethnic Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. Aliyev has signed several energy deals with the EU, including one last month. And even if he's not a fan of the European Parliament for calling out his human rights abuses, as we heard in his speech to fellow leaders earlier.
Instead of addressing fundamental problems of some member states, such as xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, migration, competitiveness, problems of the homeless people, European Parliament targets Azerbaijan, spreading slander and lie. And the reason is that Azerbaijan restored its territorial integrity and sovereignty, put an end to separatism, and brought war criminals to justice. In response, Parliament of Azerbaijan on May 1st decided officially to suspend cooperation with the European Parliament in all areas.
Yeah, Richard Giragosian, you were talking about political prisoners still held by Azerbaijan. I imagine from that clip, that line about bringing war criminals to justice must sting where you are.
Well, more than sting, it also reveals the fundamental challenge. Armenia's post-war diplomacy is dealing with a regime that's a father-to-son dynasty. It's Shakespearean. And in this president for life posturing, it doesn't do much to inspire confidence. And I do think, however, the EU engagement is also important in terms of, for the first time, the slogans coming out of Brussels are being matched on the ground. So I would give more credit to the Europeans. And I do think even the Azerbaijanis will return and turn back to Brussels.
And so these energy deals, which human rights activists have denounced, you're saying that ultimately they're a good thing.
No, simply because the real pain is for Azerbaijan's population. In other words, Azerbaijan as an energy state is similar to every other energy producer in the world, excluding Norway, in terms of entrenched corruption and an absence of democracy. But I do think the need for diversification is also a lingering pressure on the Azerbaijani regime to sustain itself.
And so, as a result, again, it comes back, does the EU seem weak or strong when you see the way it handles Azerbaijan?
Well, both. On the one hand, the EU simply lacks leverage with Azerbaijan. So do the Americans. On the other hand, the EU offers a degree of an attractive future model, in contrast to Russia, for example, which is based on coercion and pressure. In other words, Azerbaijan has nowhere to go.
And that brings us to sort of the broad point on which we'll finish here. Richard Giragosian, tell us about the election campaign. We saw with Moldova that there were influence campaigns over social media. What's it like in the run-up to that June 7th vote? How much outside meddling is there?
Well, the good news is the outside meddling is not working. In other words, this is an election much more about local economics, local issues, rather than foreign policy or even security. Having said that, the government as an incumbent has a unique advantage in that it has no rival or contender from the opposition. The opposition remains Jurassic Park dinosaurs in Armenian politics. The government, however, needs to be held to a higher standard. And at times, the Armenian government dangerously cuts corners in governance. That also means the Armenian population needs greater accountability.
Tonike Gordadze, again, there's this Mark Carney making the trip, I don't know how many time zones away, to Yerevan. We saw that speech that he made in Davos at the start of the year, where he talked about middle powers. Here, again, selling liberal democracy in 2026, does that make you weak or strong?
I think the Canadian attitude is that now the best allies for Canada are in the other side of the Atlantics, and they need to stick to these allies that are also on the same the same level of interest for the liberal values. And this rapprochement between Canada and the European Union countries goes together also with some other countries of the North Atlantic that are now considering to join the European Union. I'm talking about Iceland, that will organize a referendum in July, if I'm not mistaken, or later. Same thing about Norway, which is almost part of the European Union. They have all the possible integration, economic, etc., integration with the EU. So it really reinforced the European Union. It reinforced the European Union's links with Japan. and with South Korea. This is the problem of the American foreign policy now, bullying the allies and forcing the former allies, or still, I want to still consider U.S. as our biggest ally, but threatening them, scaring them enough to unite, and despite the ocean that is between them. And last point, maybe about this electoral campaign in Armenia and the European attempt to help Armenia to protect itself from foreign meddling. That's why I don't believe that this is again poking. Even Europeans are not poking the bear, because the bear is also waging this hybrid war on our territory here in Europe, in Western Europe, in France.
It's fighting fire with fire.
That's why it's very important here for our political debate here inside France to not to tell that we are just like Ukraine provoked Russia. This is not telling the full story. The full story is that the threat came from Russia. Not the threat, even the attack came from Russia when it comes to Ukraine. When it comes to Armenia, it's explicitly they are attacking all Armenia's aspirations, European aspirations. This is a black PR against Europe, saying that Europe is against Christianity, Europe is a gay marriage, like for everyone, etc., etc. So you have to react to that if you have any geopolitical ambition in this world. And I hope Europe will have this geopolitical ambition. And Armenia also geopolitically is very important, the whole South Caucasus, because all these connectivity corridors that are developing now, because Iran is out of the game, Russia because of the sanctions, it goes through this region of South Caucasus. And that's why also Azerbaijan and Armenia are now surprisingly acting together to protect themselves from Russian influence. It's the first time since the independence that Armenia and Azerbaijan are making similar statements when it comes to Russia.
All right. Thornike Gordadze talking about how even the EU's become attractive to Iceland and Norway. Didn't include Switzerland in the mix. But
no, but Switzerland will vote probably next year or 2028 on a new set of bilateral agreement with the EU, which for Switzerland is already a big move ahead.
All right. They say close only counts in horseshoes. Richard Verdi, I want to thank you for being with us. I want to thank as well Marie Krapata, Thornike Gordadze, Richard Garagosian in Yerevan. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.